Welcome everyone to the ISM New Jersey webinar series. This particular program is called The Voice of ERP. And at this time, I'd like to welcome all of our ISM members. I'd like to welcome all of our guests and our speakers. And I'd like to send the program over to Gupta, who will be running the program.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for inviting us to speak, and thanks everybody for joining. This is part of Voice of ERP. As Kathy mentioned, we meet every Thursday, every second Thursday, I believe, right, Kathy? Every month. So this is a monthly series at noon. So we are going to be meeting next month. We have very prominent speakers lined up from the ERP community, and for today we have wonderful Lisa Anderson, and she is super popular in the supply chain as well as ERP community. Before we speak with Lisa, I would provide a little introduction about myself. Otherwise, Kathy is going to be mad at me. So, if you don't know me, I'm Sam Gupta. I'm your host. I also host a podcast called WBSRocks, and then principal at ElevatIQ. ElevatIQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. We help our clients with the ERP selection, ERP implementation, etc. On that note, I am going to move to Lisa. And Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself? If people might not be familiar with you, do you want to kick us off with your intro?
Sure. So I'm Lisa Anderson, president of LMA Consulting Group. I work with manufacturers and help them successfully navigate their technology, ERP, and supply chain so that they can have profitable, scalable, profitable growth.
Okay, amazing. So thank you so much for being here, Lisa, first of all, and thank you so much for finding time. Obviously, your time is limited. And here, the audience that we have, they are from the procurement community, and they are trying to learn how to be Lisa. Okay, so we are going to go back a little bit more into your story, what got you here in terms of how you started, maybe talk about your first job, why supply chain, and then walk us through your story a little bit more.
Okay, sounds good. So I started my career at Coca-Cola Enterprises, and it was actually a really interesting role. At the time, I had just graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and the operations management program at Chapel Hill was progressive. Like, there wasn't very many of them in the nation at the time. So it was like one of the first supply chain type programs out there. And I had done a senior project that related to supply chain. So related to like maximizing a company's profit, inventory, and all those types of variables, which is exactly, what I do today. And so I utilized that experience in my job interview at Coca-Cola and was successful. So it was a really interesting job. I actually planned production for their West Coast facilities. And I supervised the transportation or supervised the building of the loads, what needed to go from the production facilities to their sales centers to be sent out to stores. So it was actually, just a fabulous way to get started and, right there in the supply chain from day one.
Okay, so very interesting journey. And obviously, we have a lot to learn from you. So let's say we want to dig back a little bit more, but before we do that, we are going to ask the audience that, okay, I don't have a ton of questions. So I'm actually counting on you guys to provide some questions. So please send over your questions, okay? And we are going to be covering those questions first. So please comment in the comment box. So Lisa, going back to your experience. So obviously you have the supply chain, but ERP is slightly broader conversation in general, the way ERP systems work. By the way, everybody sort of defines ERP very differently. Some people are going to think that, okay, supply chain limited to procurement, supply chain, but then that could be when you are talking about the real collaboration between these systems, it could be all over the place. So let's say if I were to ask you, what is the definition of ERP system in your eyes? Okay, what do you consider an ERP system? Maybe you can provide some lights there.
Sure. So, I mean, really, to simply look at it, the ERP system is what companies use to take orders, purchase materials, produce materials, ship, invoice, service customers, even find customers. So pretty much they help to support running the business in the most effective way possible and providing a superior customer experience for your customers. So it's technology to support your day-to-day activities and help you spur forward with improvements and not just automation, but predictions, and we could go, well, I'm sure we'll go on and on, but that's how I see an ERP system.
Okay, amazing. So great insights there, by the way. And one of the questions that the procurement people, especially if they are going to be slightly less seasoned in their career, one of the questions that they are going to have in their brain is, okay, how do I move forward? Okay, and they want to know what all different roles that they might be able to pursue. Again, ERP could be all over the place. It's pretty much everything, right? So let's say if you were to compare and contrast between a supply chain consultant versus, let's say, the ERP consultant, or maybe different career path that might be there for procurement people and how they sort of collaborate, what is going to be their roles and responsibilities. So maybe talk about some of those roles there.
Sure. So, well, actually, as I said, I started my career at Coca-Cola Enterprises, and from the first, my first job at Coca-Cola, being in the supply chain, you had daily interaction with the ERP system. So you had to become really good at utilizing an ERP system effectively if you wanted to be successful in your role. My second job, I was in charge of planning and purchasing. So that really relates to this audience for a plastic injection molder that made like jars they put cream in, those kinds of things. And again, a different ERP system, but I became very proficient in how to utilize the ERP system. In this role, I've not only to just plan and purchase, but really there was a lot of emphasis on inventory management and, how do these functions relate to the other functions? And then I went to a company that made absorbent products, both supporting the healthcare industry as well as the food industry. And so in that role, I was there for many years, and I held multiple roles in supply chain operations. I became the vice president of operations and supply chain. And we actually, we ended up purchasing two other companies. And then one of them was bigger than we were. And then I was responsible for merging the people, the processes, and the systems for the operations side of things. And so we ended up not only very involved in how to utilize the system, merging functionalities, and we ended up selecting multiple ended up selecting a new ERP system, upgrading the ERP system, implementing the system, and then also rolling out some niche technologies with the system, like a transportation management system, a warehouse management system, definitely a forecasting and inventory planning type system that relates to procurement. So basically, I guess what I would say is that ERP and the supply chain, inclusive of purchasing, are going to be related to any role in the supply chain. If you could have a path where you're focusing in on ERP, but the ERP folks who are most successful, and today, one of the things that I do, although I'm a supply chain expert working mainly with manufacturers and distributors, is that I actually am well known in terms of ERP selection as well. and of course, helping clients utilize functionality and, improving their business processes as they roll it out. But as we do that, I find that the folks who are in ERP that are good, which is, of course, who I'm looking for my clients to select, because it's really about the software and the partner, because, I'm sure we'll get there. But nevertheless, the people who really know ERP are the ones that understand the process. So you could start down the supply chain path, a procurement path, but ERP is going to become critical if you want to be successful. Or you could start down the ERP path, but if you don't have the background and really in supply chain, because it's such a critical element of these types of companies today, you're going to, you can always follow a set of rules, but the problem is if you don't know how to implement and tweak the process as you go so that you can make it meaningful and achieve results, you're unfortunately going to become one of those bad statistics, because there are plenty of poor statistics in ERP implementations. So does that help answer the question, Sam?
Yeah, it does. And by the way, I love the merger story. In my experience, it's almost like bringing two families together, and they have different operating procedures, different beliefs, different cultures. And when you bring them together, it's a nightmare in my experience.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I just thought of something else. One of the things that I've noticed recently is I just, wrapped up a client I was working with for like 18 months. And we actually took service levels from, it was around 40% to the 90s, and helped them grow the business, reduce lead times. And, the one thing that every single person said in their testimonial videos is that what was meaningful to them is that we helped the client better utilize their ERP system and roll out some functionality that could help them better sustain the process so they can be successful long-term. So I just thought of that because I think it just points out how important those skills are in combination for, I think for everybody's career that's on this phone.
Yeah, could not agree more. And honestly speaking, I wanted to touch a little bit on the other comment, which is, good ERP consultant, I guess. And, if you look at the whole gamut of ERP consultants, obviously there are like a million, and everybody sort of, understand, what ERP systems are, but obviously it does take a lot of experience to really understand what you are doing, right? So let's say if you were interviewing somebody for an ERP consultant role, and I'm pretty sure you probably do that as well, during your engagement, because typically most ERP engagements, you are probably going to have, 10, 15 team members, 2, 3, 4, 5 different companies that are typically working. So let's say if you were to, and by the way, this is going to be helpful for our procurement audience as well, because they are writing RFP, and they need to select vendors, they need to select consultants. Right. So how do you distinguish between somebody who is really good versus they might not be as seasoned?
Well, you're absolutely right. One of the things that's a little bit unique about our ERP selection processes is that we actually do look at, what team members, or at least core team members, would you be able to put on this project? Because as you said, the software matters, because you have to have you have to at least have the right functionality to support your critical business factors. Yep. However, you could have that perfect software, and if you don't have the right team to help you implement the software, you will, it'll be like you're driving down the freeway in a Yugo or something. So basically, how you would do that is the problem is quite the challenge. So you need to find somebody to interview them that is not just an ERP specialist, and that's not just a process specialist. That's the hard part. You really need somebody who crosses both. And there's what they have different names, but there's like business applications, like experts, that's sort of a process expert in the system. And there's systems analysts, and they're more of like the technical side of the system. And so really what you don't need somebody who's expert in the particular software to interview. I don't think that's necessary. However, somebody who's an expert in the types of processes and is an expert in ERP systems in general, like they don't have to know SAP functionality to the minute detail versus Oracle versus Epicor versus M4 or whatnot. Or Sage, but they would need to have utilized, like similar to, like I'm saying, I work with clients all the time and they all have different ERP systems. So I'm familiar with all of them. So basically you have a good ERP foundation, knowledge set, and you understand what an ERP system should do. So there's actually some like complementary education with ISM, with the in the APICS world, the Association of Supply Chain Management. They also provide like some fundamentals of ERP type education, which is complementary to what I know ISM, I'm been involved with both, does from the procurement standpoint. So there's and you don't need necessarily that education, you just need to have that kind of a knowledge. So like a knowledge of what an ERP system should do, at least the foundations, process background, so that you understand, what the process is, what you want to do with your processes and where it should be going in the future, so that you can make sure that your ERP system is scalable and that your consultants understand the ERP resources, could be an internal resource, understands enough about the processes to be able to not just listen to people and see if the system will do that, but they can ask good questions. That's the really key thing. And then the third thing I would say is, this would be an ideal. It's hard to find it, but you're not going to find somebody with also the systems analyst side, most likely, because there's so few of them. But you have people who have enough understanding. One of the things that in a way it's great, and in another way it's terrible, that I've had this like skill set, so I know what to look for. And that is, like, you have down the line thinking capabilities, so that you at least know enough about how both of those work, so you can say, and the technical side, so you can say, if you set something up this way, then like this, down the line piece of ERP is going to be affected in this way or that way. So if you have to have a little bit of that knowledge. If you had it all, that'd be awesome, but not everybody's going to have all this knowledge. So you're not every company is going to be able to find somebody, but basically if you could at least find somebody with as much of those as possible, or a team that could help bring it out, then you can ask the right questions to find the right ERP resource and consultant, which is the reason why this is so challenging, because there's so few people that can really understand this, that unfortunately in the ERP world, there are a lot of good salespeople that sound really good, but that, when you go to implement it, the folks that are implementing are saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't work at all with my day-to-day practice. Like, how am I going to do this? And then we're off to the races.
Could not agree more. I think, I really like your comment about the implications on the downstream processes. And typically, I've been doing this myself for like 20 years. And it's very, very, very hard to predict the outcome, even if and sometimes it's very hard to explain as well, to be honest. Okay. You sort of know that, okay, this is how I've seen it. Okay. This is how it should be done. Now, if you are going to be asking a million questions, okay, I'll give up. Let's just go ahead with whatever everybody's feeling, and then we'll figure it out, I guess. Right. So that's always a challenge. And I'll give you a crazy story from my perspective. Okay. And then I'm always looking for, crazy story from your side as well. So in this particular case, okay, I was working with one of the customers, and they did everything right, to be honest. Okay, there was nothing fundamentally wrong about the process or the implementation. Yes, they reviewed the materials, they followed the whole selection process. Manufacturing company, I think they used to manufacture buses, I believe, not very big overall from the SKU count perspective, roughly 800 different SKUs. So you would think that this is probably just SMB. What could go wrong? Any ERP system might work for this business, right? 2 years into implementation, as soon as they started going live, okay, the MRP process breaks, does not work at all. Okay. Now, what are the reasons? Because the system operational capacity of the system, it cannot handle the load of the MRP. The database was not really designed to handle the workload of these BOM layers that you have. And again, it's very hard to predict those things. So Lisa, I don't know if you're going to have any sort of insight, advice in how to uncover these issues in the front end of the process, as well as if you might have any other stories that you have seen from your perspective.
Well, I mean, there's countless stories. So you just mean any sort of like ERP challenge that's come up along the way? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, let's say some of these issues are very hard to forecast, I guess, and again, these are very...
Well, gosh, there are like the challenge with ERP is that so much of it is quite the challenge to forecast. So I guess one of the things that, one of the clients that I had, I would say one of the things that's interesting about ERP is that I go into clients and I would say the vast majority of clients, and this is typically I'll go in on the process side in this case, but the vast majority have an ERP system, and many of them will think that the ERP system is broken and that it's not supporting their business. And so they'll say, well, it's not giving us the right answers. We can't utilize the functionality to figure out what to buy and those kinds of things. Like you were speaking about MRP, which certainly relates to purchasing. That comes up all the time. We have our MRP system is telling us to purchase way too much or way too little. We really think we need to upgrade to a new system. And so I would say that probably more like, I was going to say 80% because, the 80-20 rule, but it's probably more like 90%, 95% maybe, where what I find is that in every case, no matter how bad the system, you would not believe some of the systems that I've come across with companies that sell multi-millions and billions of dollars of products and services. They have some really archaic systems sometimes. And so no matter what system, we've always been able to make substantial progress where like we could go from, if you're talking about inventory levels, which is popular today, we had several $1 million too much in quotes of inventory compared to what, their corporate objectives was or something. And so we could bring down inventory levels. Of course, the key there is bringing down inventory levels while maintaining service levels and ensuring that you have what your customers' future needs are. So we were able to do that by utilizing their current ERP system in a way that they just hadn't, like they either didn't know, in many cases, how to utilize the functionality. A lot of times it goes back to the setups of, like, for example, MRP. It also could go back to knowing how to get data out of the system, and updating data. So there's many different issues that have gone wrong. And we help to resolve those issues and make directional progress. Because one of the other things is like, if you wait for everything to be resolved, we would never get anywhere, or it would take like a year. And, really we're looking to make some quick progress with these clients. So, I've run across my fair share of problematic IT departments, shall we say. And some of them wouldn't even let you take information out, do anything. But there's always a way. You can always find a way where you don't have to do it manually. Oh my gosh, I just thought of one example. This client had, and it's a related example, but this client had actually a pretty robust system. It was Microsoft AX. And by all means, I sat there and watched the person in procurement manually do MRP. And it was also like a configure to order, engineer to order type company, like you were describing with the bus situation. Because I have run across that situation too, where they were maxed out of their database. And that typically happens with older software. But anyway, in this case, it was like unfathomable that this person would have to go through this with a system that obviously is capable. And so we, work to it. Of course, it's not a no-brainer. You can't just turn on a switch. There's always problems, especially in a configure to order, engineer to order business. But, we worked through it, and it was like, the light bulb went on, and, she was able to approve requisitions and review them instead of like literally counting up pieces of paper, looking in drawings. And it was like quite the utterly ridiculous situation. But nevertheless, every time at a client, you can upgrade. However, on the ERP side of things, since I wouldn't want folks to think you never need to upgrade, because that's not true either. I would say that, like I said, there's only one situation I can think of in clients in 17 years where they couldn't utilize their system to a greater degree. And in that case, it was without screwing up a convoluted set of manual processes that were highly functioning, but risky. But aside from that, we've always been able to utilize the system. However, I have had a situation where I've been working with a client and then they were running into the wall. So basically they could not grow further successfully without upgrading, because if you have a system that's pretty old in today's environment with the complex customer requirements, the customization needs, the quick response, there's the e-commerce, customer relationship management, and all, I could go on and on, Internet of Things, you're going to run into some roadblocks. The question is when you run into a roadblock, is it just like you're following a fad because as everyone else is doing it, or is it something that's really important to your business? If it's something important to your business, you better be looking ahead for those, because it's not like you're going to implement an ERP system with a snap of fingers. It's going to take substantial time. So, but I do find that a modern ERP system is going to be needed. It's just, you could be on a parallel path doing both. So I don't want to, you probably have other questions. I don't want to keep going on, Sam, but does that help provide an example anyway?
It does. It's a great example, to be honest. Okay. And I absolutely loved it. And I am going to build a little bit more on that. And maybe you can provide some more examples there, I guess, that our listeners can take some takeaways from that. So obviously, one of the things that you mentioned is the inventory. And overall, if I look at the understanding, how people sort of relate, connect with the inventory, typically that is going to be very cross-functional in nature in general, right? Some people sort of understand this, some people don't understand the way the processes are going to be, they are going to be all over the place as well, okay? So when you look at the inventory, and typically inventory is going to be, in different systems, and unless you have the state of the inventory across your channels, across your systems in consistency, your inventory is probably going to be off. And then you are going to be, writing those journal entries. That's what most businesses typically do. Okay. So let's say if you were to offer any sort of advice in terms of how to align this inventory across the channels. When you create BOMs don't necessarily belong to just, procurement, or, it's a very cross-functional document that everybody has to share. So right. In your experience, let's say if you were to sort of provide any sort of advice in terms of the inventory accuracy as supply chain as well, how would you, do that?
Well, there's certainly inventory is a hot topic, and we could have multiple hour webinars on that topic too. Exactly. But to provide a couple of key points here, well, you reminded me first of another example, and this was a client that contacted us to help select a system. The first time I worked with them, we selected a system. They were like, they actually thought this was fabulous because we realized what's involved. But now that we've seen this, we think we need to get ready. So they like waited a few years, and then they called back, and then we went through another ERP selection process. But one of the main reasons that they called in the first place is because they had that situation you were talking about, the alignment of their inventory. In their case, it was because they had multiple like segments of their system or add-ons that like didn't keep that in sync. So there's sometimes a technical reason for it, but most of the time inventory accuracy relates to, well, transaction timing, transaction accuracy, process disciplines, because, people are like, well, I'm really busy. I'm going to catch up with all these production transactions at the end of the day. And then of course, like the third shift person's like, well, now, like this machine broke down and, there's always something. And so somebody catches them up later, but do they? I mean, do we really know that's what we produced? And was there a keying error when we entered production in this case? So there's, really, it's got to be run more like clockwork, where you have this is who is responsible for the transaction. This is what, the timing we're supposed to enter these transactions, or even better yet, in most cases, and I'll explain that, but, is to implement barcoding or to automate the transactions. You could even have, you can utilize IoT on your machines, and there's a lot of things you could do. But I would just caution folks that I can't tell you how times people say, I want to automate this because like this is causing such a problem. I'm like, oh my goodness, if we automate your process, you're going to have worse information just faster. That's the only issue here. So we need to you don't automate without improving your process at the same time. Again, why ERP and supply chain go hand in hand. But so anyway, so transactions, the other thing that it could be is that you have like strange timing, or not, things aren't coordinated. So you'll ship product before it's actually produced, at least in the system. That's obviously problematic because you don't have anything to ship. But like then you'll get stuck in the system, and so then folks might add it because they figure they'll add, they'll subtract it later, or they'll adjust for any nuances later. But does that ever happen? Those kinds of things. But also there's when through cycle counting, simple cycle counting would be really helpful. However, cycle counting is a whole nother story, because you don't cycle count and then just adjust. Now you need a person who can actually perform research, and that person has to be looking at transaction timing and a lot of the things I talked about, and say, which of these issues are, what's the real root cause here, and do I even have, first of all, an adjustment? Because most of the time when you have an adjustment based on a cycle count, you don't necessarily know if that's true until you've done research. So once you do research, then you have to get down to your root causes, and you should be looking at, of course, from the 80-20 point of view again, looking at start with your A items. If you can't figure out what's happening with those, you really got issues going on. So don't worry about all the rest if you can't even figure out your A items. So you may as well start there, figure out what these root causes are, and then start resolving the root causes, or you're never going to get squared away. You'll just always be chasing your tail, which I have to say some clients have done over the years. And so I guess they eventually get tired of it and they call.
So some very interesting layers there. And I am going to unpack a little bit more in that argument, and then probably you can offer some more commentary if you have any sort of insight, advice there. So overall, when you look at this whole process of research and debugging, and you also mentioned the automation and add-on. Okay, so obviously it looks very fancy when you talk about many different systems in the process. Everybody's going to talk about how they are all going to cure your systems and processes just because, you are going to introduce this new system, but new system meaning new problems in the process handshake, in the architecture, I guess. So overall, from your perspective, in my mind, when I look at the process collaboration, if you have everything in one system, it's just easier to find everything because you are not dancing around different systems. So do you see any sort of issues because you are using multiple systems in the process versus just one system?
Well, definitely the overall trend has been for a while now, somewhat for a different reason, but is to have a base modern ERP system that'll meet the 80-20 of your needs. And that is the better way to go. because otherwise you will have issues. And as good of technical resources as you might have, coordinating the transfer of data and the
Yep.
timing, and they just aren't embedded. They might be integrated, but they're not really embedded
Yep.
in each other. So yes, I do believe that it's better to have a base ERP system. However, there are some niche functions, not inventory management for sure, because
Yep.
or I should say definitely not inventory accuracy, that relates to the system, but there are some niche functions that you are going to add in as and usually they can be extensions. It depends on the type, how big your company is and which tier of an ERP system you have. Some of them will have bought some of these extensions, which cannot, could be, they could seem better to people at corporate because they're owned by the same person, but they may have some of the same issues. So, but some of these extensions are typical that you would, want to utilize if you are looking at managing your inventory levels, for example, depending upon your industry. You even mentioned one of the industries, like the configure to order, engineer to order. Sometimes that functionality is built in if you have one of the more robust systems, or it's also specialty. So it depends. Not every system has an ERP, it has a ETO or CTO module, a configurator module, basically. On the other hand, you can purchase one, and is that the right decision? I would have to say it completely depends. That's why, unfortunately, in the ERP selection world, it's a very much a process problem, because you're looking at the equation and saying, I could have the like companies and like industries with similar problems, and I could easily come up with two different recommendations. One, I'd say, like, let's just implement an add-on because what's their base ERP system? What are their people's capabilities? What's their, there's a lot of things to think about. And then the other one, I could say we really should upgrade to a modern ERP system that supports your business better than the one you have.
Yeah, so amazing insights there. So let's say if we look at this from the procurement perspective, and typically in my experience, okay, they are probably going to be in the most pain. And the reason for that is because they sit right here. They are dependent upon data from many different departments. And then finally, their planning is going to be off because the other teams are not really providing the insights that they are going to be needing for their supply chain planning, for inventory planning. But they are probably the last people who are going to be invited in the ERP discussion, in my experience. And sometimes, when the ERP is selected, then they are going to be brought in and they are going to have a little fun there, right? So let's say if these guys are trying to, sort of amplify their voice in the organization and how they can be more of the champion and collaborate this process, maybe lead the process, how would they do that, Lisa, in your experience?
Well, I would first of all, I would agree with you that procurement should be a base ERP function. Although I would say that there are some advantages that, there's some forward-thinking strategies like, procurement portals, and there are, there's some like blanket orders. Blanket orders themselves are pretty standard, but there's, I actually had a client recently call and say, I have this issue in Europe with the system, and they can't do they're really struggling to do some, we wouldn't call them advanced necessarily, but medium level functionality. And they were talking about procurement. And he said, well, can you help me figure out, somebody who could help us with this issue? And so I helped him, find, some of these, what might be considered basics in procurement are not necessarily always implemented in the forefront. So to your point, we really do need to involve, all core functions, including procurement, in the process. Just also another one that pops to mind that's oftentimes a problem is the outside processing capabilities, which involves procurement, because you have manufacturing orders or process orders, POs, and is always complications with those processes, even if the system works just fine, because they may not have implemented it properly. So yes, I would agree. So I think your question was, how do you, if you're the person in procurement, how do you get yourself involved in the ERP process? Is that what
Yeah,
you're...
how they can become champion, let's say if they want to lead the process, typically in my experience, CFOs are probably leading depending upon how you define the ERP, I guess. But let's say if the procurement wants to lead or supply chain people wants to lead the whole process, and they are maybe the leader of the process as opposed to sort of just the stakeholder and followers, I guess.
Right. Well, I think that you can't, certainly supply chain, and I would just say expand your the way you talk about it to be in the best interest of the company, of the team. And for sure, procurement and supply chain has a huge a huge impact, I should say, on the business and on the business's success. And certainly now that we've been through the pandemic, everybody knows something about what supply chain is. So they, if nothing else, they may have the wrong impression. It doesn't matter, because basically they understand more that supply chain is something they should be concerned about because it was a problem creating issues for them. And so I think if you can, talk to, like, for example, like how, the dollars spend, if you have significant dollars spend, you wouldn't want to put that at, you want to be considering not just dollars spend, but what about the risk if you don't have the products coming, if you're a manufacturer, if you don't have the materials, the components coming when you need so that you can produce, you won't meet your customers' expectations. You'll inhibit the ability to grow. And these days, if you don't have a forward-looking view of what you need to do, to what you need to purchase, you won't be able to maybe secure supply even, or secure supply at a rational price that would be accepted. So you can talk to, and then how does that relate to the ERP system and why you should be involved? You should start talking about just why that is. That, if you're passionate about like the importance of making sure that that we don't have the type of risks that arose during the pandemic. And of course you have to tailor it to what happened, what's going on in your company. And if you managed it really well, you would say just that. We're not aware because we've had solid processes in place. However, the reason we have that is because we've been staying on top of this. So to make sure that we don't have risks of lost customers and lost profit, which are the two largest risks to happen during an ERP process. And who wants to have that? So if you're bringing that up and you're bringing up specific examples, you don't want to be the naysayer to say, just the sky is falling, but you say, I have with my involvement, I can help avoid those risks. And I also am thinking forward to, I have some ideas of how we can take procurement and supply chain to the next level. Now, if you don't have those ideas, perhaps you should, the good news is you're at this webinar. So perhaps you should do things like this. There's many places you can get like what's happening in the industry and ERP, et cetera, and you can bring them into the conversation. So I would just say that you can easily make a story, tell your story about why it's relevant. And I would be hard pressed to think that anyone would not take that on. It depends on your position too. Like I've had clients that solely want to bring us on to confirm that they're going in the right direction, and what risks do they might see. In one case, they were like, well, do you think that we should move out our go live date because they are already in process, in addition to the selection projects I was talking about? So if your position is one where you can bring in an expert, it doesn't have to be, can provide a quick return on your investment, and you can provide the team with some helpful direction or at least confirmation, and you can have an external expert be able to show why it's so important to involve key functional areas in the process early on, especially procurement and especially these days. So like that's another option. Of course, it probably depends on your position, but on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with telling the story that I told, even suggesting, have you thought about bringing in a third party type of observer or someone to evaluate the process, provide some suggestions, and so that we can ensure we're successful, because after all, 80% of ERP upgrades of any type fail to achieve their intended results. So like you could certainly make a story with that.
Okay, amazing. So we are at 45 minutes point, or 46, I guess, at this point of time. So Lisa, do you want to quickly touch on how people can find you if they have any questions later on?
Oh, sure. Well, of course. It's LMA-consultinggroup.com is my website. It has all sorts of information there. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, and it's Lisa Anderson, which is somewhat of a common name. Also LMA Consulting Group Incorporated, but the Lisa Anderson part would be Lisa Anderson LMA. So that might be a way to find me as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Lisa. This has been so insightful, and I'm pretty sure the procurement folks have had some takeaways from it. So that's it for today's show. If you guys have any questions, obviously reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to answer. And we'll see you next month. And Kathy is going to send out the communication for the next show for this one. Kathy, do you have any last minute closing comments by any chance?
No, I'd just like to say thank you to you both for this great conversation today. And I want to thank all of our audience for participating. And, definitely second Thursday of next month, come back and join us for our next show. And thanks again.
Great. Thank you.